All right. Well, welcome so much, everybody, to the last of our four sessions on the Neighborhood Hub's webinar series. This year, the theme was Renew and Repair. We have focused not just on the gateway cities of the state, but also on various municipalities, community development corporations, and research entities that are doing a lot of interesting work around what we call the other housing problem in the Commonwealth, which is just the homes that could be kept in better shape. So those are the homes that are in need of some TLC, in need of some upgrades. And they are, and it is a challenge, whether it is in Boston proper or all the way in Pittsfield. We do have neighborhoods that are in need of more attention and homes that pose definite health issues and cause disparities when left unattended. So with that being said, I just want to start sharing a little bit about the Hub and the work that we're doing. And then I will pass it on to Tara, who will talk about the work the Attorney General's office does. But basically, the program that I run is called the Neighborhood Hub. It's located within our agency, MassHousing. So I figured I'd tell you a little bit about MassHousing. We are an independent quasi-public agency. We were created by the legislature in 1966. And we provide financing to create and preserve affordable homes and provide affordable home mortgage loans to home buyers. So whether it's financing for large developments across the Commonwealth, or really helping families who want to buy a house in this beautiful state but cannot afford to because it is so expensive here, we try to provide options for them. So about the Neighborhood Hub, the Hub really started, the inception was in 2019 or so, when our wonderful friends at MACDC and MassInc, as well as the Gateway City Caucus, researched and lobbied to really bring attention to this other issue of the Commonwealth, which is homes in disrepair. With that, the program was created and we launched it last year, which was a tricky year to do things, but we carried on as we do. And it's now become one of the programs that we have available for technical assistance for neighborhood stabilization. We continue to get funding every year through the state. So until that stops, we'll just keep doing it. And the goal of the program is to support the revitalization of neighborhoods with a high rate of vacant, abandoned, or underused housing structures. So if you know what they call the broken window theory, basically if you have one house or one area that is not being kept well, the chances are that it will spread. The chances are that it will lead to health issues, that home values will go down compared to neighborhoods that are in better shape, even if they are next to similar services. And you know, it's what people call blight, and we don't want that. And how we provide the TA is through equitable technical assistance with interventions tailored to the needs of each local community. We know that the work that is needed in the city of Fitchburg may be different than Malden or Salem or Fall River. So we intend to both work with flexibility so that each city or town has the services that are needed, but also equitably acknowledging that the issues and the problems that we see in neighborhoods, they do impact households of color more. They're greater felt in immigrant neighborhoods. So we keep those things not just in mind, but we look at the data and think thoughtfully of where to provide assistance first. We are also looking at both COVID-19 and Great Recession affected communities. So that's what we mean by equitable technical assistance. And ultimately also encourage partnerships between municipalities and their local organizations, whether that's CDCs, redevelopment authorities, universities, Habitat for Humanity, all of these things. We know that we working collaboratively, while it may take a little longer, tends to lead to more thoughtful results, is what we found. So that is what we try to do. A little bit about the program details. It's a 2-year technical assistance program. Again, we intend to have the municipalities and local partners on board. The grant amount is up to $100,000 for technical assistance. And as I said, we give preference to communities impacted by COVID-19 and those impacted by the Great Recession. We do not work in a silo, we at least try not to. So the hub is, we have an advisory that is comprised of a variety of different agencies, public and private in the Commonwealth, that provide support. So we have MassInc, the Department of Housing and Community Development, MassHousing Partnership, Mass Development, MACDC, and of course the Attorney General's Office. So all of these different entities have housing programs, or different programs for renewal of neighborhoods. So we work with them to make sure that we are thinking thoughtfully of the different aid we provide. And the themes that the projects tend to fall into are 4 organizational improvements. So that's, we support, say, if a local CDC wants to create wants to rehab homes, but they don't have much experience with single family homes, we try to think, okay, how as an organization do you need to change in order to provide this technical assistance? Reuse plans and strategies, so that's, whether it's an urban renewal plan or a more focalized housing plan, looking at that, but with the intention always for it to be pre-development. So for example, if it's a capital needs assessment in order to then rehab affordable homes, we can do that. Regulations and incentives, so as you'll hear from Liz Murphy today in Fitchburg, we also provide support for the development of regulations and incentives to mitigate disrepaired homes. Again, trying to understand where things haven't been working and how we can fix that. Trying not to recreate the wheel where needed, but just seeing what needs to tweak and what systems need to improve. And finally, property ID and prioritization. So if both the cities and CDC partners or others are ready to go, but really just need to figure out where to start, we also work in prioritizing properties for redevelopment, looking at what programs are available, etc. And the way that we run it, it's not a program that, we provide funds and just say goodbye. We do check-ins, so I do check-ins with all the different cities that I'm working with. We do check-ins all together so that cities can learn from each other. I try to provide newsletters. Really, I just forward interesting things sometimes. But we do also have this annual webinar where we showcase what everybody is doing. And we are gearing up for a second round. So come October, which is literally around the corner, the application will open for more communities to join us. So I'm super excited for that. I will email everybody that has attended these with more info. But in the meantime, I'm really excited to hear from all of our speakers. Muchas gracias, and thank you for being here. And again, I am the Neighborhood Hub Program Manager, Francis Joan Goyes Flor. I don't know if I've introduced myself yet, but please let me know if you have any questions, thoughts, or are interested in applying. We are really excited to have you join us. And with that, I will turn it over to Tara. And thank you all. And please, any questions out to the chat. And yes.
Good morning. Thank you, Francis, MassHousing, and Hub Partners for the invitation to participate in today's program. My name is Tara Ruddle. I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Neighborhood Renewal Division of the Office of the Attorney General. And I thought I would share just a bit about some of the work that our division engages in for those that may not be familiar. I am trying to share my screen, but for whatever reason, I am unable to do so. I'll keep trying, but in the interim, what our division, part of our work, engages with communities across cities and towns across the Commonwealth, rather, and we partner with them to address vacant or abandoned residential properties. And those partners, our current partners, that is, are depicted here on this map in the dark purple shaded areas. Also depicted on this map are the physical locations of the Office of the Attorney General. Clearly, there's an office in Springfield that would cover the western portion of the state, an office in Worcester covering the central portion of the state, an office in New Bedford covering the southeast portion, and the Boston office, which covers Metro Boston as well as the northeast portion of the state. Across these 4 offices, we have attorneys general, paralegals, and a program manager, all of which work closely with our community partners' boards of health. We find that being structured across the state in this way, being close to proximity to our community partners, allows us to effectively and quickly respond to their needs, whether that be the need to schedule property inspection or perhaps give a presentation about our work to a board or other municipal department. And part of our work, which involves receivership petitions. And this slide provides a very high-level overview of how that process unfolds. We begin the process with a referral from one of our partners, and the referrals that we receive come in all shapes or sizes. They generally come to us through our Board of Health partners. And once we receive that referral, we then schedule an inspection of that property with the Board of Health and any other relevant municipal departments. That could include building, police, or fire department. And we do that in order to assess whether that referral would be a good fit for potential receivership action. And part of our assessment is the fact that there be current existing violations of the state sanitary code. And the reason for that is that any potential receivership action would be based on Mass General Law, Chapter 127I, otherwise known as the Receivership Statute. And that is a statute that governs enforcement of the state sanitary code. So again, once we've assessed that a property would be a good fit for a potential receivership action, we then do a title review to identify the owners or any other interested parties. Once that process is complete, we then send a demand letter. The demand letter notes the violations that have been cited, as well as the intent to seek the appointment of a receiver to correct those violations. At this point in our process, we proceed in one of 2 ways. On the left with a cooperative owner and on the right with an uncooperative owner. With a cooperative owner, we coordinate with the town and the owner as to a plan for repairs. Those repairs are closely monitored. Once the town is satisfied that repairs are complete and all of the cited violations have been corrected, we would then close out the matter on our end without the need for further court action. At the other end of the spectrum, however, with an uncooperative owner, and that could be an owner that simply doesn't respond to our correspondence, or an owner that is unwilling or unable to undertake the repairs necessary to bring the property into compliance. In those instances, we then turn again to the receivership statute and petition the court for the appointment of a receiver. If the court allows that petition, a court-approved receiver then is appointed. They go about the repairs, and in that process, they also file a lien for the cost of those repairs. Once the repairs are completed and the town or a city is satisfied that all code violations have been corrected, the receiver would then seek to be reimbursed for those expenses. At this point, if the owner or identified interested party is unwilling or unable to satisfy the receiver's lien, the receiver would then request authority from the court to foreclose on its lien and sell off the property. And it's important to note that within the receivership statute, the receiver's lien is given a priority over a mortgage or other lien holder, with the exception of a municipality. And that's to ensure that the receiver's costs would be reimbursed out of the proceeds of any potential sale. In those instances, any surplus from the sale would then flow to the mortgage holder or any subsequent lien holder. It's important also to note that during this process, an owner does not lose title to the property unless the receiver is forced to foreclose on its lien. In either instance, either through working with a cooperative owner or working through the receivership action, the end result is a property that is brought back into compliance with the state sanitary code, a property that no longer poses a threat to the public health and safety of a community, a property that no longer has a negative impact on property values in a neighborhood, and finally, a property that is back on a municipality's tax rolls. I realize that was a lot of information. I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A session of the event today, and I'll put my contact information in the chat as well. Thank you again to Francis and MassHousing for putting together such an amazing seminar over the month. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. All right, and now I will remove you from the spotlight, I guess, and I will pass it on to Monique, who will be one of our two moderators for this webinar. Thank you, Monique, so much, and Peter too, who is here. All right, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monique Gibbs. I am a Policy Innovation Associate here at MassHousing. So I'm so happy to join you all and participate in this fourth and final webinar series for the Neighborhood Hub. I am going to hand things off to Abbe Will, followed by which I will be moderating the Q&A. So any questions you have for Abbe, I will be reading them out to her and engage in conversation. So Abbe, it's on to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Monique and Francis. Really excited to be here. Let me get my screen up here. Hopefully you guys can see that. So yeah, I'm Abbe Will. I'm a senior research associate and associate project director of our Remodeling Futures program at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard. And I'm here today to share findings from our latest Improving America's Housing report. This is a report we do once every 2 years, and it's really in conjunction with the release of HUD's American Housing Survey, which is where we get a lot of really rich data on home improvement activity in the US. It is activity by homeowners. So I will share some rental data here, but we really don't have the same level of detail for what types of improvements or repairs and how much is happening to the rental stock in the U.S. So I, really looking forward to hearing from folks here for any insights into that part of the market. So I will share this report. It's on our website, free for download. I'll put the link in the chat afterwards too. We put this report out back in the spring of this year, and so kind of understanding historic trends in the remodeling market based on that historical data from the American Housing Survey, and then of course trying to understand how the pandemic has changed the remodeling market in the US. And much of our analysis is kind of looking at national trends as well as major metro trends. We try to get down to more granular detail where we can, but the data again is just really, really challenging there. So let me just get into the key themes of the report. We saw steady expansion of the remodeling market in the years leading up to the pandemic, and then that expansion continued last year. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really a question of whether we would actually see growth in home improvements and repair spending in the U.S. But I think everyone's kind of heard those stories at this point that, the focus, everyone being at home, spending time at home, working from home, learning from home, just all that extra time spent at home, I think put a lot of focus on improvements and repairs last year. So we saw growth, over 3% last year, up to $420 billion nationally spent on home improvements and maintenance and repairs to both the owner stock and the rental stock is our estimate. And we're projecting that there's been even stronger growth this year, almost 8% growth in 2021. So some of the sources of that strength, we had the surge in DIY activity in particular. So that kind of got a lot of attention last year, and this year continuing, that again, homeowners kind of trying to do the work that was maybe on their list even before the pandemic, and then realizing, as their needs in their home were changing, that they maybe needed to make some improvements or changes to their current situation too. And I'll get into a little bit on multi-generational household shifts during the pandemic. Certainly a lot of mobility and home ownership shifts with a lot of sales in the market, and how that impacts remodeling. I'll talk a little bit about some of these geographical changes, market strength shifting from our higher cost coastal areas like Boston, New York, DC, the West Coast markets, to more affordable interior metros, actually. So that was a shift that was kind of accelerated, I think, with the pandemic too. And then the pandemic also, didn't just change some things, but kind of, pushed along other trends that had already been underway before, including spending for exterior replacements, kind of your roofing, siding, windows, doors, as well as outside property improvements, decking, landscaping, that kind of stuff. I think what we then saw on the other side of the market of spending was owners that were more, deferring projects, what we call discretionary projects, kind of the kitchen and bath remodels, the room additions, that type of work, the interior projects that, especially kind of during the worst of the pandemic and the shutdowns last year, were deferred, delayed, canceled. So we saw a little bit of a shift in activity in that way. Older owners, I'll touch on them in a little bit here to show you some data that they account for over half of spending on homeowner improvements in the U.S. But then, of course, we have this wave of younger households, that millennial generation, really moving into their prime first-time home buying ages, and then they're becoming a much more active part of the remodeling market too. Then, and so owners obviously, we talked a lot about kind of that K-shaped recovery last year, that we had just two sides of the coin here, with homeowners who kept their jobs during the pandemic, kept their income, even saw income go up, weren't spending to, travel, for example, or eat out. And so they had, a lot more income to kind of, and finances to spend on home improvements and repairs. Whereas obviously, so many others, homeowners and other household renters, losing their jobs, losing their income, and not being able to really even keep up on maintenance repair necessarily, let alone improvements to their homes. And then I'll touch on the longer term kind of prospects for the remodeling industry that are also really positive, beyond the pandemic. And I'll go through those in a little bit more detail in a minute. So I'll try to run through a lot of these quickly. I know I've already taken up a good chunk of time here just describing the key themes of the report, but this is just to show you the market size, total market size in the US. So again, this is spending for home improvements as well as maintenance repairs to both the owner occupied and the rental housing stock. So the orange pieces are the rental and the blues, the homeowner stock. And again, a lot of our data and analysis focuses on that darkest blue, the homeowner improvements piece. And improvements, I'm thinking folks are probably aware, but improvements are, really any type of activity, a project done to the home or the property that adds value to your home. And then maintenance repairs are more projects that will just maintain the value of your home. So this is a composition of the national remodeling market, the homeowner improvement part of the market, which we have this rich detail on to show that about almost 50%, 46% of spending is for what we call replacement projects. Again, kind of roofing, siding, windows, doors, flooring, interior replacement type projects. Systems and equipment, heating, cooling, all of that is what we think of as the replacement activity in the market. And then the purple pieces there are more discretionary projects, the types of projects that, I think homeowners love to do, but certainly don't need to. You can put those off. And I think we saw that last year with the pandemic, that the discretionary projects, kitchen and bath remodels, room additions, more likely to be put off. And then outside property improvements, and in particular disaster repairs, I'll show a little bit more data on that later too, are a bigger part of the market. We're becoming a bigger part of the market even before the pandemic. And so, what changed again with the pandemic, this is data on DIY spending, what homeowners are kind of doing themselves around their home. And and this is historical over the last couple decades, showing that the share of spending, the share of total home improvement spending for DIY projects had actually been on the decline before the pandemic. So that really was a big shift last year when DIY activity really boomed. And again, I think part of that was taking off from projects that were kind of pent up demand, as well as realizing different needs in your home and what you might want to do to make your home really fit your current needs, as we were using our homes in different ways. But before that, the share of spending in the market for DIY had really been on the decline for several reasons. I think it was certainly partly our aging homeowners, much less likely to do DIY projects than younger owners, although we'd really seen it consistently, like across ages too, that fewer and fewer dollars for home improvements were being focused on DIY activity. And this is just a quick look at what we are trying to track in terms of the data that we have before the next American Housing Survey comes out. And so that orange bar, that is retail sales of building materials. That's your Home Depot and Lowe's sales, other hardware and paint stores, just to say that the activity on the DIY side was really booming, whereas contractor activity for remodels, for really everything, the pro side of the market struggled to come back after the worst of the pandemic, certainly compared to the DIY activity. So this is another trend that shifted with the pandemic, the location of strength in home improvement spending. So before the pandemic, this data here, remodeling activity was heavily concentrated in higher cost, typically our coastal metros, where rising incomes, tight for sale inventories were driving up house prices. Obviously good for current homeowners who want to invest in their homes, but or maybe wanting to use home equity to finance those improvements. But then what we saw with the pandemic, with this chart here, is that remodeling activity was actually stronger in a lot of lower cost metros. And that's where larger shares of younger households, traditionally also those that are more active in the DIY space, could better afford to buy and improve their homes. So this is roughly the top 50 metros in the country, the areas with higher shares of younger homeowners under age 35. So places like San Antonio, Louisville, Kansas City, Nashville, Oklahoma City, kind of that upper right quadrant, tended to see stronger growth in remodeling permitting last year. This is permitting now instead of spending, but indicative of kind of bigger projects for the most part too. And then metros with lower shares of younger owners, where it's much harder to enter into home ownership because of affordability, saw declines or lower growth or even declines in permitting last year. So Philadelphia, Boston, New York, San Francisco, Miami, LA. And there were some other remodeling market trends that the pandemic didn't change or reverse, but again, kind of pushed along, accelerated, including the growth in spending for replacement projects and for outdoor improvements to your lot or your yard. So you can kind of see that here. We're looking at the share of spending by those project categories over time. So in 2020, then professional remodeling firms, kind of serving those specialty markets, they were generally reporting an increase in workloads last year in terms of exterior work, again, roofing, siding, windows, doors, outside property. Those projects were just not as critical for homeowners to get that work done, thinking about the concerns of having contractors on their property and outside the property versus inside. So again, those discretionary projects much more likely to have been deferred last year. So this is share of home improvement spending by age of homeowner, and just to say that older homeowners are a very large part of the market. They spent over or about $140 billion on remodeling projects in 2019, lifting their share of spending from 40% of the market back in 2009 to now 52%, over 52% by 2019, and that concentration of spending by older homeowners, it's obviously that we have more older homeowners today with the aging of that massive baby boom generation into those age groups, but it's also that they've increased their spending. So the average spending for home improvements by older homeowners has increased quite a lot over this time too. So this maybe is the, kind of a key slide for our discussion today, and certainly what we want to continue to look at and focus on with some of our work going forward is that, many homeowners, and again, thinking about what happened with the pandemic, suffering job loss, income loss, keeping up with mortgage payments, let alone, maintenance or repairs or improvements was obviously incredibly challenging last year. And we have some of that data from the Census Bureau's Household Pulse survey to say that, 4 in 10 homeowners had experienced at least some amount of employment income loss between the start of the pandemic and the end of last year. 1 in 10 owners were behind on their mortgage payments by December. Of course, lower income households suffering, the effects of the pandemic even much more so than higher income households. So this is, again, data from before the pandemic from 2019 to say that more than 40% of homeowners reported no spending at all for home maintenance or improvements in 2019. Another 12% invested less than $500. So, obviously owners making little or no investment in their properties. We can look at who these homeowners are. They tend to be older, tend to have lower incomes, tend to be in lower home values, lower valued homes. They also tend to live in older homes. So improvement spending for these homeowners when they are doing projects, when they are spending, tends to focus on replacement activity too. But of course, we think about the finances of these households who aren't doing work, and thinking if they're not improving with the pandemic recovery to the point where they can cover their back mortgage payments as well as kind of the deferred maintenance and updates to their homes. We obviously would expect that disparity in housing conditions between the lowest and highest income households to increase over time. Oh, it looks like this slide is a little, there we go. So, I don't know that I'll spend a lot of time here, but just to say that, these are kind of topics that we're continuing to think of as, what are some changes that we've seen with the pandemic that we might continue to see moving forward or not. I think that's the question. Will the focus on working from home remain, and what does that mean for remodeling activity? The growth in multi-generational households, how much will that continue to shift potentially moving forward? Interest in healthy home upgrades, air filtration and ventilation. We think that was a small but growing part of the market before the pandemic. We think that the pandemic gave that a boost. And then, the mobility shifts that we've seen with the pandemic to, folks moving from more dense parts of the metro to the less dense parts of the metro potentially, or shifting metros altogether, and the sales resulting in remodeling activity either before the sale or after the sale. That's something that we've been thinking about in terms of continued growth for the market, and then the shifting tenure choices too, that again with the millennials kind of jumping into home ownership as they can. What is that going to mean for the remodeling market moving forward too? And this chart is just to say that home improvement spending does differ quite a bit with housing tenure, with the type of housing. So this is average annual per unit spending. So we've estimated that a rental unit will receive about $1,200 of spending on home improvements annually every year. And again, this is across all the stock, right? And so you can imagine that one unit might get quite a lot more investment than that at one point of time, and then others might not see any investment in a given year or for many years. And then of course an owner unit, typically seeing quite a bit more spending for home improvements compared to your typical rental unit. So if we see that shift from more renters to more owners, we would think that would boost the remodeling market moving forward over time. And the same with the shift from condos to single family homes, thinking about the households that might have been, moving from more dense parts of a metro to the suburban, exurban, rural, potentially parts of the country, buying bigger homes, wanting more space during the pandemic, and then spending more for home improvements on these bigger homes too. So I'll just end here. I think I've gone on way too long, but just to say that there are many parts of the market that we're continuing to kind of look at and think about in terms of longer term impacts to the remodeling market. And the one I do want to highlight is this increasing incidence and severity of natural disasters, that disaster repairs are making up 10% of home improvement spending, or they did in 2019. That's double the historical share. We reached a new high of $26 billion for disaster repair spending in 2019. And what we know from NOAA is that 2020 set a new record of $22 billion disasters in the US. And that's what this data here shows, is our home improvement spending over time for disaster repairs, with that the growth in the number of disasters, the number of severe disasters in the US. And what we would then expect with that kind of peak in disaster activity in 2020, that disaster repair spending for homes in the US will also continue to be elevated moving forward, at least for the next couple of years there. So I'll stop there. I'll put that link in the chat, and looking forward to questions.
Hi, Abby. That was so interesting. It was a lot of data and a lot of covered content. It's like you answered some of the questions. Like I was thinking, and I'm like, it would be interesting to hear how, Lowe's data can kind of play into this. Cause like, for instance, my mom works part-time at Lowe's. And if you go there on a Saturday, like if she goes like mid-shift or midday in for her shift, she's like park way in the back because it's packed at Lowe's on a Saturday, especially in her suburban area of Westchester. One question that has come in from Amanda Ford. So she said, are there data on which renovation activities are more associated with homeowner age groups? For example, older homeowners most likely to do ADUs, et cetera.
So yes and no. Certainly in the American Housing Survey, we can kind of look at the activity by age, and I shared the spending, but yes, you can also look at the types of activity by age. And when we've looked at that in the past, we can get down to certain types of projects. ADUs are not ones that we have a lot of insight on and a lot of data on yet. Although that is an area that we very much think, again, a small part of the market, but a growing part of the market, and obviously depends on a lot of like local land use laws and restrictions. And we think that that'll be shifting as we move forward, just because it's a good way for homeowners to have that extra space, potentially have a family member living there, or even renting it out, right? So and boosting your income that way. So yeah, there isn't a lot of good data on the ADUs in particular. Otherwise, we can kind of just look at more generic, broader activity in terms of replacement projects, discretionary projects by older versus younger, and in particular that pro DIY, that younger owners tend to do more DIY activity than older ones.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that large percentage of the pie that hasn't done any type of work. And, there are lots of factors that come into that. I think, and I'd also like to see that geographically. Is that something that is more concentrated in areas based off of income, race, those types of things? Because we know, those things are all interconnected in some way.
Absolutely. And so we haven't really dug into that data in more detail yet, but that's what we would expect too, those differences between areas of the country, regions, or even parts of a metro, for example, the parts of our country that have older homes tend to have older homes. certainly older homeowners, lower income homeowners, we would expect to be a bigger part of that share that are not doing projects in any given year. Although I will say that, especially when we're thinking about home improvements, the data historically over time shows that a large share of homeowners don't report doing a home improvement in any given year or 2-year period because of the AHS being a 2-year survey. I think it's like 40% of homeowners report not doing a home improvement project over the past 2 years. And that's something, that might make complete sense, it's a big expense to do a home improvement project. So typically saving up to do that. Not necessarily wanting the disruption of a home improvement project, especially kind of those bigger interior projects. But right, the maintenance and repair in particular is something that we are concerned about, that so many homeowners are saying they're not even doing basic maintenance on their homes in any given year. And so that we want to investigate a little bit more to know, who and how and why, all of the key questions to understand how we might be able to address some of those concerns for the housing stock not being in good repair.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Abby. Before we get too far off track, I'd like to hand things over to our next panelist, Liz Murphy from the city of Fitchburg.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Hopefully I can get this slideshow working and share my screen. Folks can see my screen now, I hope. Let me know if it's a problem.
We can see a beautiful little duck.
Oh, wait. No? Let me try again.
It's cute. There you are. That's the presentation.
How's that look?
It's good. I think there's a way to show it. Yeah, the displays. There you go. Duplicate slideshow, maybe.
There. Better?
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Let's kick this off. So thanks. I'm Liz Murphy, Director of Housing and Development for the City of Fitchburg, and we're participating in the Neighborhood Hub program and looking at our vacant properties and trying to make some changes in policy around those properties. And we're working with Barrett Planning Group, LLC, as a partner in this project. So Fitchburg, we are a gateway city. Population has grown just a smidge, where we went from 41,000 to 42,000 in the last census. 37% minority. Median income is about 57,000. So a little bit lower than some of the Metro West areas. We are in central Massachusetts, north central Massachusetts. But we do have a bus and a train station in our downtown, and we're actually the last stop on the commuter rail to Boston, so we can get there. We have a very small airport, a housing market that was pretty slow, but it's starting to become competitive. Actually, just in the last couple of years, a lot of activity during the pandemic. And you can see our average home prices jumped from 204 to 330 between the last 2.5 years. So, unfortunately, the construction costs are very comparable. So even though our prices are lower than Boston, they're still pretty, if you need to fix it up, it's still going to cost just about as much as it would in Boston to do that. And we do have a growing arts and culture community that we are trying to foster. So back in 2008, when the foreclosure crisis hit, that was the first time we generated a vacant property ordinance. It hit Fitchburg hard. We really had a hard time keeping track of all of the properties that were coming up for foreclosure, whether they were occupied and vacant, whether utilities were shut off. just finding folks to be able to board those properties up if they became unsecured was a real challenge. So the Board of Health did create a vacant property registry. It took a little bit, but we finalized it in 2012, and we kept the fees low because our main priority was getting the information, and so we wanted all of the banks to register. And it didn't take long before they did. So we had $100 annual fee for foreclosing banks, and we had about 200. For a few years, it was about 200 a year, and luckily that has slipped down quite a bit since then. So we did a good job, I think, of getting us out of the foreclosure crisis and managing it while we did. And now things have changed. The characteristics of our vacancies are very different now than what we had when we started when the foreclosure crisis hit. So now most of the vacant properties are long-term vacancies. They have some sort of development barrier, and that's why the market isn't fixing them. They're blighting, quite a bit of work that needs to be done to bring them up to code, and likely a larger investment than the property would be worth at the end of the repair. So what happens is somebody buys a property very cheaply. They think they can do all this stuff to it. They find out there's no parking and that's needed, or they find out there's some other major issue that's a barrier to repairing, and they don't want to lose the money they invested. So then they sell it again, and it sells and resells. Eventually, the price goes up really beyond what it's worth, and then it'll just sit for a while. Most of these properties are multifamily. We don't see a lot of single family homes that are just sitting vacant like this. Those are probably the easiest for the market to take care of on its own. But the multifamily, the commercial and industrial will sit for a while and pass back and forth. So like I said, they are often cost more to renovate than they're worth. So they need to be able to be acquired at a low price if anybody's going to fix them up, or some other intervention needs to come in. So this is an example of a property that, so I've been here for 15 years with the city, and this has been vacant for over 20, probably over 25. This is kind of typical of what we see. It's sold a bunch of times and it's for sale again. It has this weird fire escape that's connected to an occupied building behind it. And the way they're intertwined is not easy. Like, you'd have to reconstruct a whole new fire escape separate, and it would be this is on a steep grade. You can't really tell that from this picture, but that's what happens. This one keeps passing back and forth, and the building behind it is not owned by the same property owner that owns this property. So this one just sold again in March for $90,000, and it's got a for sale sign right on the door. So then these are a couple of other examples of what we deal with. This one row apartment building it's been vacant for over 10 years. We've seen it sell and resell again. And it sold last year for $155,000. It doesn't have any parking, but an owner, if they wanted to redevelop it, could easily buy parking permits in one of our parking garages that's not that far away. Then the next property next to that, again, this is the same street. These are a block away from each other. All the way to the left of that picture is a building that abuts Main Street. So you're looking at a side street off of Main Street. And the parcel is connected to the Main Street building, which makes things a little bit tricky. And then these are the two census tracts that most of our vacant properties are in, and 7107 is actually the tract that all of those properties that I just showed you are in. These two tracts have our lowest median incomes and our highest concentration of minorities. So it really is disproportionately impacting minorities and low-income folks with these vacancies. So in order to address this, we need to change the way we do things. So we need to sort of reinvent our vacant property ordinance. We started with working with our consultant to review best practices within the state and the country. We wanted to get, we wanted something that would have reasonable deterrence to holding vacant property for a long time. So we want to disincentivize having the property sit there. We wanted to include residential, commercial, and possibly industrial properties. Right now, our current foreclosure requirement is only residential. So we want to include some sort of minimum maintenance standards that require an owner to just keep the property at least stable, so it's not declining in whatever its systems are. So at least that we can sort of stop the cost bleed of rehabbing these properties. We wanted to make sure that residents and other stakeholders were also providing input and very engaged in the process. And they have a lot to tell us. And then we want to look at ways that we can connect these vacant properties with developers and look for opportunities to provide affordable housing as our market is changing. And, you know, I wouldn't say that we are a gentrified community, but I think we're heading in that direction in some areas, and we want to, you know, be proactive in making sure that the residents that currently live in Fitchburg can continue to live here affordably. So we also want to create an acquisition fund for nonprofit developers to, you know, when an opportunity arises, we want them to be able to react quickly. If this is a good opportunity, they don't want to have to go apply for development funds in order to purchase a property. So we'd like to create that revolving fund so that there's always an opportunity to respond quickly to these vacant properties if they are for sale. So we engaged with Barrett Group, and they did an initial review of our existing vacant property of a wide range of existing vacant property ordinances in the state and the country. And they found that these fall mostly into three types: the vacant and abandonment model, the foreclosure model, which is the model that we currently have, and a hybrid of those. So the vacant and abandonment model requires owners to register after a specific duration. It is really mostly used by communities that have long-term challenges like us, often used in conjunction with an escalating fee structure year over year. So there's the disincentive to keep a property vacant for a long time. And they have steep fines and fees imposed. And they're focused on eliminating the vacancy or the vacant property. The foreclosure model, which is Fitchburg's, is just requires a registration on notice of default or intent to foreclose. The approach is aimed at encouraging mortgage lenders to maintain property throughout the foreclosure process, which works pretty well if you do a thorough job of that type of registration. We found that for the most part it worked. And then the hybrid model is, like it says, a combination of the two. So Barrett Group took a deep dive at one example, Williamton, Delaware. So it has a population that's roughly almost twice what Fitchburg's is. It is self-supporting through fees, and they couldn't say enough about how effective it was. You have 30 days to register. It's billed at the same point in time every year. They take in somewhere between $350,000 and $1 million every year on this. So I guess they probably have quite a few vacancies. But they have a base of at least 350,000 that they're taking in annually. And I think, you know, overall, the goal would be to not need this anymore and not to collect that much money because there are fewer vacancies. So this is an interesting one that Wilmington posts their vacant properties and their owners online. They publish this. You know, it's somewhat of a shaming tactic, I think. We're considering that as well. Inspectors will get to know the vacancies, and they have their regions that they're in. So they are prepared to provide evidence for the records when properties are vacant. In particular, I think this comes in when somebody doesn't register when they should, and other action needs to be taken. And their unpaid fines and fees become liens on the property. So they have some teeth to making sure that they are able to collect. So this is an example of their escalating structure. So you pay nothing in year 1. In year 2, you pay $500. In year 3, it's $1,000. Then it's $5,000, $10,000 by the time you're at year 5, and $2,000 after that. So you'd have a property owner pay $20,000 if they had a 10-year vacant property. So I would hope that would be some incentive for them to repair or sell. So then our consultant looked at the property registration ordinances in Massachusetts. 56 of our 351 towns have them. A majority of them do charge a fee, and the fees are kind of all over the place. Many of them are registrations that I think came up as a result of the foreclosure crisis, and their fees are low to encourage registration. But most of the gateway cities have an escalating or variable fee structure. So those communities like Fitchburg, who may have more than our fair share of vacant properties, are starting to use the escalating structure. So next we needed to get a better sense from the community and from stakeholders, staff, city council, residents, advocates of housing, landlords. So we conducted some focus groups and 2 online surveys. Focus groups didn't go quite as well. We had 3 people at our focus groups, lots of interest, but it's always hard to get a lot of people in at the same time. So we did focus more on the online survey after that. And so we had 47 responses, 25 from city staff and counselors, and 22 from the community. And this is sort of how it broke down. So there are folks here that identified themselves in multiple ways. So you see the math doesn't quite add up if you try to add all those numbers together, but 17 respondents were just residents. Oh, I'm sorry. This chart here is just from the community survey, not the staff survey. So we had 17 that identified as just residents, 8 that were owner occupied, 5 that were landlords, 6 that were Fitchburg business owners, 7 considered themselves advocates, 2 were employees of a Fitchburg business. What did I do? There we go. And then 1 said that they were an advocate for a population impacted by this issue, and 1 was a housing advocate. So out of those responses, with the staff responses as well, 2 of the 47 didn't think we should have any kind of registry, and 4 wanted more information. But overall, the community and the staff were very supportive of the direction we want to take the ordinance in. 87% supported the registry updates rewriting it and the main themes that we had put into it or proposing to put into it. And in general, we got a lot of support. We had a lot of comments from folks saying, oh, we're so glad that you're doing this. This is a great initiative. So we're really happy to see those kind of responses. And so we asked some very specific questions like, what do you support? And this is where we gleaned most of the specific data. 87% support fining for those that don't register when they've been notified to do so. 72% support adding commercial property to the registry, which we currently don't have. 75% support the escalating fee structures, and 14% in addition to that wanted more information about that before they answered the question. 70% wanted or supported fee structures that might be different for different types of properties. And 86% supported publishing the registry. I think our discussion will be, do we publish the property addresses or just the landlord names? And I guess that there'll probably be some debate on that within our group.
Hey Liz, we are running a little bit late, so if we can wrap it up real quick, that would be awesome, and then we can talk more about this during the panel. Thank you.
Yeah. So one thing that we are not sure that we can do, but we got a lot of support for, is requiring property insurance on a vacant property. In Massachusetts, you don't have to have property insurance, so we certainly don't want to run afoul of the law, but we'd like to institute that if we can. So next steps, we are pulling together an affordable housing group to discuss how the registry treats those types of developers that might need to patiently wait for funding sources to be put together while they're holding property. We're trying to develop mechanisms to connect suitable vacant property with developers and create a revolving acquisition fund. We will be outlining our ordinance for review with staff and legal, which that's what the Barrett Group is working on now. And then hopefully sending that full ordinance to council for adoption. Quick lessons learned. A vacant property ordinance is not a silver bullet, but it is an important tool for neighborhood revitalization. Engaging the community was really a great way to educate folks on the work that we're doing and garner some support to hopefully push us to the finish line with this. And, you know, we need to think about creating that ordinance in a way that allows us to be nimble. And when the climate changes, if we have another foreclosure crisis, we want to be able to adapt it without having to start from scratch. So we're going to try to work that into it too. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Hello, Liz. So this is Peter Cooper. I'm an associate attorney here at MassHousing. I principally work closing loans for our multifamily division, but I support our single family, and I help Francis out with the Neighborhood Hub and other programs as well. So we're running a little bit below on time or short on time. So I'm going to ask you just one question that we got, and then we'll do the other one in the round table. So someone asked, where do the funds that come from the registration fees go? Do they go towards repairs or just to the city? And I guess, is there any kind of thought about what you could use fees for, especially if you adopted kind of an escalating fee structure? Yeah,
we are, you know, that's going to be part of the next discussion that we have. Some of that will go back to the general fund because there is an increase in the cost of staff just related to running this. But beyond that, I think that the discussion will be, do we put it into a revolving fund for those things like boarding and securing, demolition if the property really has no value, and then rehab for affordable housing, which would be great. Or does it go back to the general fund and then we have to ask for these funds sort of separate from that? But that will certainly be the direction that we're going in, that we do want to use the funds to further affordable housing to remove the blight.
Well, thank you very much. Up next, we have Peter Shapiro with Good Landlords in the Commonwealth.
Hi, Francis. Can everybody hear me? So I'm electing to use Francis's kind assistance for my PowerPoint, which she is gladly doing. I had a little technical question in the morning, but I'll just start as she does this. My name is Peter Shapiro, and I've spent 25 years on the front lines dealing with landlord-tenant conflict, with the goal of trying to stabilize small landlords and help prevent evictions for tenants at risk. I'm a consultant now, and I'm going to talk about three solutions that I think will be helpful. But just to say quickly, now we're going from the granular data and the vacancy and the AG's concerned about how to deal with disposition of vacant properties to the broader prevention picture. What I want to talk about is small landlords quickly. I'm going to burn through some slides because I know our time is short, but the ability for small landlords to maintain their stability as they provide housing, affordable housing to tenants at risk. So let me go as quickly as I can here. My mission is to identify the reasons why small landlords have become an endangered species and prevent three strategies, as I mentioned, for how to address this and stabilize small landlords. So you got my bio. I'll tell you, Francis, when to move on the next slide. Thank you. I work for Mass Landlords, a statewide association, 2,200 members, over 7,500 on our mailing list. Mission is to provide better rental housing. We do a huge range of services, training, coaching, directory, rent collection, newsletter, etc. Masslandlords.net. You'll see our URL. Really encourage you to go to us and learn more about us. We have grown dramatically in the last few years. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to just quickly go through who are these small landlords, what challenges do they face, and three ideas to help stabilize these landlords as they provide housing to tenants. Next slide. Who are the small landlords next? Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but here is a snapshot. This slideshow really is for your long-term interest. It's good to think of landlords as falling into small four categories. Developer converters, the old-time slumlords, of which we still have many, the long-term residential mixed-income landlords who provide an enormous proportion of our housing, do either market or mixed market affordable, and then the owner-occupier or small landlords own one or a few properties. And we'll talk about their characteristics. Next. Okay, I'm not even going to discuss this, but this is more detail about these landlords, so you can read that at your leisure. Next. So I'm going to give you a few statistics. I am not a data cruncher. Abby could give a much better presentation than me. I'm just going to create the context for who these landlords are as a proportion of our state and our nation's housing stock. So firstly, that should be small individuals own close to half of our nation's housing. 22.7 out of about 48 million units are owned by individuals versus corporations or legal entities. Next. And this is another slice through that. 85% of our 2 to 4 unit rental properties in the US are owned by individuals, compared to 9% of the 50 plus unit rental properties owned by individuals. Next. And this is another slice through, and this is data that one can look at carefully. This is US Census data 2000, so it's dated. Over 50% of the total residential units are in small buildings. So if you, excuse me, if you look at up to more than half of all rental units are in buildings up to 4 units, another quarter in buildings from 5 to 19. So most of the stock across our country and similar in Massachusetts is in small buildings, or a large proportion. Next. Now this is data in Boston. I work for the city of Boston as the city's landlord counselor, and I do mediation, and I work for this department, Department of Neighborhood Development, as well as working for mass landlords. 46% of all properties are in, 46% of the rental units are in buildings that are 1 to 6 units in size. So we know, any of us in these urban centers, particularly Boston, you see all the triples, the 4plexes, the 6plexes. That's a huge proportion of our housing stock. Okay, please go next. So now a little bit more about the characteristics. And I think I'm preaching to the converted, just to create a little context for why we need to help these small landlords if we want to preserve affordable housing and preserve our neighborhoods. Most small landlords, as we all know, backed into the business. They never really intended to become professional landlords. They bought a building in need because they knew they could fix it. They inherited it, the property. They kind of, as Liz is talking about it, they buy a building thinking they can do something with it. They realize pretty quickly they can't. And then they either flip or foreclose. And so accidental landlords is a key characteristics. Next, please. They hold on to it, although that's changing over time. And I'm quoting Alan Mallock, who presented for Neighborhood Hub. He's an extraordinary housing expert, has a lot of information to help us. Typical property owners held on to his or her property for 10 years or more, has no plans to sell. I won't dwell on this, but the point is that often for the small landlords, they have a self-interest to keep the building as a source of income, as a hedge against unemployment, and they often will hold on to these properties for the long term. Next. So as others have pointed out here, we see a declining proportion of our housing stock owned by individuals, whereas prior to 2001, 2/3 of our properties with 5 to 24 units have been owned by individuals, not corporations. Now that proportion has gone from 2/3 to 2/5 over the 15-year period, 2001 to 2015. So I think that's a theme that we're hearing, that smaller landlords are being swallowed up by larger landlords or investors and gentrifiers. Next. Okay, and again, not to dwell, but if we look at data at the low income households and into which buildings they live, we see a large proportion living in the small buildings. So many of these small owners have, a large proportion of low, moderate income tenants, some of whom are Section 8 or in place subsidized, some are not, but they house a large proportion of our low, moderate income tenant population. Next. Thank you very much, Francis. Okay, and as others are pointing out, the nature of being a small landlord. I own 4 3-families in a lodging house. I keep my rents reasonable. I maintain my buildings. I'm probably an ideal landlord for the naturally occurring affordable housing owners preserving their housing and not getting bought out. We see small landlords being less profit driven and providing more affordable rents. They spend, as Abbe pointed out, the do-it-yourselfers spend less per unit than large owners using their sweat equity. They minimize spending to avoid vacancies, keep their rents reasonable. So they ultimately they're not as profit driven. They don't measure themselves by profit in the same way that the larger owners do. And it contributes to disinvestment in many cases. It also keeps rents affordable. It also keeps tenants from being evicted. It's the natural state of the many small landlords in their informal business operations. Please go on, next. So this is a much bigger discussion than for now, and perhaps debate, but what you hear in the news about prevailing rents, particularly in urban areas like Boston, is not what is actually happening on the ground. I know I talked to 300 landlords in FY21 for the city of Boston. I've been counseling landlords for 30 years. Most of my work is involved with on the front lines, dealing with small landlord challenges and keeping their buildings going, dealing with tough tenancy issues. And I can tell you that when they offer their rents and they don't advertise with Trulia and Trillo and Zumper and the other major platforms, their rents are lower and you don't hear about them. So it's a longer conversation, but there are, if you really were to dig deeper into the informal housing sector, you'd see that there are an enormous number of below market, undercapitalized rents owned by low moderate income owners who are not really reported in the press. And bigger conversation for now, but just to make that point. Next. Okay, so this is a really interesting new study, Henry Gomery, Princeton University, and he does this careful analysis of how the characteristics of large versus small landlords with respect to dealing with eviction and stabilizing tenants. He says, you know, the large landlords, their eviction rates are 2 to 3 times the rate of small landlords. They file 2 to 3 times as much. They serially file to use it as a rent collection strategy, formal decision-making, arm's length. Small landlords, informal, personal, grapple, struggle over what do you do when a tenant can't pay. They have personal contact. They don't want a single mom with kids to be evicted, but they go too far before they start the eviction, then they become at risk of foreclosure. It's a very tough and very different calculus for how small landlords deal with eviction and try to maintain housing and keep their income stable for their own needs. I hope I'm not going too quick, but I'm just burning through to get to a few key points. Next slide, please. So what challenges do these small landlords face? Next. Okay, so we all know when we hear about the large affordable housing and mixed income providers that there is a battery of professional assistants, thank goodness. Property managers, maintenance staff, resident services coordinators doing the human services piece of helping tenants stabilize, accountants, leasing professionals, lawyers. Most small landlords don't use these services for different reasons I'll discuss in a few minutes. Many small landlords who may have bought some years ago and are still holding on to their properties can't get loans, you know, home equity loans or refis, because their incomes have changed, their credit situations have changed. There's a program called Home Tap at NPR. I heard about this wonderful program to give landlords a chance to get money, but it was so many small landlords who can't get the money they need. I know there are many programs we need to talk about all the ways they can get help, but this is a chronic challenge for many small landlords. Next slide, please. But just to mention this difference between, you know, having professional help and not makes its enormous impact on your ability to maintain your properties. So I know this is a key challenge. Dealing with tough tenancies, keeping tenants stable, requires knowledge of the law, putting tenants on notice about lease violations, starting evictions, not necessarily to get eviction, but to make tenants aware of the consequences if they don't meet their obligations as tenants. Mass Landlords has only 2,200 members out of 70,000 small landlords in Massachusetts. We have 7,000 on our email list, but we don't reach nearly the number of landlords. Most landlords don't afford to pay legal fees when they need to pursue eviction or even to become educated about how to enforce lease requirements or put tenants on notice for lease violations. And the eviction diversion initiative, which the state put $170 million into, 10 million of which is for right to counsel, has a much higher proportion of money devoted to tenant legal services than landlord legal services. Mass Landlords has not been able to figure out the figure making requests, but there is an enormous disproportionate amount of money to support landlords legally, and that creates enormous consequences when tenancies go awry and landlords need to resolve issues over eviction. Next slide, please. So I call small landlords an endangered species. Others can wax more eloquently than I on this question of the changing number of sales in second quarter 2021 versus second quarter 2020. We have a huge uptick in sales. I won't dwell, but I think many of us understand that this is happening. Next. Okay, and when the moratorium was announced, our membership rates sank. Next. Due to people wondering whether to stay in their business. And this was due to the fiscal market crash, housing collapse 2008, the pandemic, and the strong tenant rights climate can make it tough for landlords, accelerating the sell-off. Next. So we know when small landlords fail, we lose, neighborhoods and tenants lose. And I'm not going to dwell on this because I think this is at the hub, metaphorically, of what is Francis and Neighborhood Hub's work. So this is what we're dealing with. Next. Okay, so how to stabilize small landlords. Of course, Neighborhood Hub is a great solution. Next. So we're trying to fix units up, improve property management, maximize rent collection, keep rents affordable, prevent evictions. That's the goal. Next. Okay, so I'm going to talk quickly about three. I'm going to really dwell on the landlord counseling: affordable property management, certified mass landlords, a mass landlords initiative, and landlord counseling. Next. So this affordable property management, it is absolutely clear from thousands of conversations with landlords that subsidizing professional help for small landlords will keep them in business and thus keep low, moderate income tenants from being evicted. I just throw out a few figures. When we know 6 to 8% on rent collection, if that could be 3%, 60 to 80 hours, $60 to $80 per hour for handy people, 30 to 40. Smaller commissions when you do capital improvement, larger jobs, and help on the legal end. I deal with evictions and resolving disputes over eviction. That is only one small piece of the larger challenge facing these small landlords. Management is at the core, and in whatever way landlords to preserve their businesses can get help, discounting whenever we can, this will make a difference. Next slide, please. Now, certified mass landlords program here, sorry, I apologize. This is three pieces. I'm sorry, you're seeing the idea of how to promote it, but I'm going to step back for a second. It's 3 steps. It's a pledge, a test, and ongoing education. The idea here is that we are promoting and to some degree enforcing best practices for landlords. We want them to be incentivized to do the right thing so they can not get into trouble with city and building inspectors and state agencies, so they can be best positioned to market to tenants. They can preserve their assets, and then they're not going to be vulnerable to tenant defenses and counterclaims on eviction issues. So yes, we can talk about registration and licensing, but Mass Landlords is initiating an effort to help landlords value understanding their businesses better, getting ongoing education so they understand what they're doing using mass landlord services. And not to dwell, but I think it's an extraordinarily useful tool that we hope to interact more with Neighborhood Hub over time as to how to expand it. And I've got a few ideas for how to do that, which I won't dwell on, but just to mention certified mass landlords, I know our time is very short. Next. Okay, landlord counseling. Now, Dukakis administration funded this, 84 to 92. This is not a lawyer service. I'm talking about this because it's a way to help landlords when they're dealing with people problems that threaten eviction or threaten their own businesses. Tenants withhold rent. Tenants are unauthorized occupants. They don't allow landlords access to make repairs. Many of the challenges that landlords face require them to understand their rights, figure out how to engage tenants, resolve disputes, and if necessary, prepare for trial, but only as a last resort. So this concept, I believe, having been a landlord counselor for 30 years, can make a profound difference in helping these landlords keep their businesses, give them the confidence that they're not going to lose if tenants start falling behind on rent, and saves them money if they are dealing with non-payment issues where they may need to cut a deal and offer money to tenants in exchange for keeping them as keeping them from being evicted, which because they're not spending $1,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 on lawyers. So landlord counseling is not being a lawyer. It's providing legal education, problem-solving assistance, and assisting them to negotiate, or in some cases mediate, and preparing them for trial. So much more to say about this. These are 3 programs. The City of Boston is the one that I work for. We are overwhelmed with small landlords wanting professional, free legal assistance so they don't have to evict tenants. Berkshire County does the same thing, and our Mass Landlords Helpline offers the service for $90 an hour. Next slide, please. I know I'm going to end in 2 seconds here. So I'm not going to go through this, but this is sort of a breakout between counseling and lawyer services, fees and keeping the case private. And a landlord counselor can get involved at the earliest stage, work continuously through the trial and post-trial. More likely when you work agreements out with tenants, are going to comply with you. You get to participate as a landlord in the decision-making process. You have control over the outcome. And then the last slide, please. Now, this is a little more detail also, but the idea is when I work as a landlord counselor, I wrap all the services around. I'm sorry if you can't see all of this, but if you look at the circles above and below, I bring the human service and the social service people in as part of the resolution process. I bring the resources to prevent homelessness, rental assistance, tenancy preservation, all of those services into the process. I help the landlord proceed through court only to keep the parties resolving the case so they don't have to go to trial. You integrate the lawyers if the landlord has a lawyer, the tenant has a lawyer, so you control the process, wrapping all the services into your education and negotiation service, talking to landlords as they need to see if you can pursue a resolution affordably. And this seems to make a difference. So landlords don't have to go to court. They can keep their rents reasonable. They can keep their money to maintain their properties and be happy to stay as small landlords, because we know this is becoming a difficult business. And we want to keep them for the sake of preserving affordable housing. So thank you for letting me zip through all this. I know our time is really short. Last slide is just my contact information. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Is that too quick?
All right, I think we're going to move directly into the panelist roundtable as we're running a bit behind on time.
Yeah, thank you all for those really great overview of all of that rich data. I'm sure as Francis noticed in the chat, these presentations will be made available after today, and on the Neighborhood Hub website through the MassHousing overall general page. So I think she added a link to the chat already, and I'm sure she'll add another one as well. So we had 3 very different perspectives. So we had a national overview from Abbe. Then we had Liz, who talked about it from a very local perspective and what she's seeing in the city of Fitchburg. And then we had Peter Shapiro, who, you know, is talking about it from the landlord perspective of the actual owners of these units and how it all works. And it is, you know, you can see that there are barriers at every level of it all. I think, you know, it'd be really interesting to hear how Peter could respond to how, you know, how a city of Fitchburg could be helpful to small landlords. And even in the case of, you know, possible investors who want to purchase some of those homes and stuff like that and be able to turn them around for either home ownership or for rental housing.
Well, I mean, I think Liz's work is critical because we need to recapture these units to the extent that we can catch these falling into disrepair properties or multiply flipping over years properties at an early stage, and both use, you know, carrots and sticks to get these landlords either into the business or sold to somebody who can repurpose the building, whether it be a nonprofit or small landlord, is great. I mean, landlords are afraid. They need affordable housing, affordable finance to get their buildings fixed up. And they need to know that if they're going to have tough tenancy issues, that they're not going to spend thousands or be unable to deal with either eviction or getting tenants back into the rent paying mode. Mm-hmm. So I think, so the earlier you catch them and the more you can give them a careful carrot and stick approach. And there are more carrots that we like. Landlord counseling is a great example, and all the affordable financing, all of that would make a big difference in my view. Mm-hmm. I could go on, but I know our time is tight.
Thank you. And then Abbe spoke a little bit about the difference between, you know, rental upgrades and remodeling and those that are happening on the homeownership side. And, you know, I'm sure with this pandemic and, you know, some landlords who have had tenants that have used them more, who are covered under the moratorium, you know, I'm interested to wonder if you're looking at projections of data of what's going to happen on the other side of the moratorium.
Yeah, I mean, we have talked about that a lot and certainly thought, you know, what these possible scenarios might be, you know, with the especially the smaller landlords, right? The ones who, you know, if they're not getting assistance through whatever, you know, services to make up that rent that their tenants are not able to pay or haven't been able to pay during the pandemic, you know, how is that, you know, all going to square at the end in terms of keeping the tenants obviously in housing, but then also keeping the unit in good repair. And so we, you know, I think the data is still yet to be seen, right? Like we haven't been able to capture enough of the hard data to know, you know, how this is really going to play out. But obviously, there's been a lot of concern that we might have some real impacts in the market.
Definitely. There was a bit of a conversation that Liz and Lily were having in the chat, and I just wanted to highlight it for those who are not following the chat. So Lily brought up a good point about how, you know, funding programs from state and federal government can be used for, you know, to bring back affordable housing aimed at small landlords. So Liz, can you speak a little bit more about what you're talking about, the need for scale, for more scaled programs for that are more applicable to smaller owners?
Sure. So, you know, many of the funding sources that large developers use are federal or state funding sources that are fairly highly regulated and have a lot of soft development costs included in them, and then have expectations at the end of the construction for a certain level of property management that really isn't just a single property owner, but more a professional property management that can keep waiting lists and do lotteries and affirmatively market. And not that smaller landlords shouldn't do that, but what you do for a property that has 75 units and what you do for a property that has 3 probably shouldn't be the same. So it's not easy, I think, for a state or federal agency to take something that has regulations or policy and procedure and massage it. I think it takes a lot of brain power. Sometimes you just can't get past something that's regulatory. So, I guess I would suggest those entities look at creating things that are specific for these types of projects, these small rental properties, which are really where the local affordability is, even without subsidy. So it's really just about helping some small landlords make some repairs so that they can affordably continue to rent their properties to folks that maybe can't afford whatever the market rate is. I think that I hope that that will happen as our climate's changing and what's left to be developed are these smaller properties.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm up next with a question for Tara from our Q&A. It was asked, is it possible for properties in the receivership program to become affordable housing, either via a nonprofit receiver maintaining ownership, or if the property is sold as a restricted unit for it to become kind of income eligible going forward?
Certainly. So we have seen some of our receivership properties remain affordable with home buyer, first-time home buyer income restricted deeds. That is a challenge, though, because it requires the capacity of a nonprofit receiver to be able to take on those projects. And in some housing courts, there is a receiver list that they work off sequentially. So it's not necessarily the case that a nonprofit receiver would always have the opportunity to take on a particular project. The court works in order, and so it really sort of is it's feasible, but it really depends on a number of factors.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, another question in the Q&A is, what role could community land trust play in the process? Any thoughts on that from either of our panelists?
I know I haven't worked with community trusts.
Okay.
So from my experience, what's good about community land trust is that it allows homeowners to buy potentially more affordably and do the repairs without having to mitigate also the cost of the cost of the actual land are sort of stable throughout. So it's a good way to stabilize home prices. And we have one of the largest land trusts, I think, or at least one of the oldest here in Massachusetts, and the country is DSNI. But it would be a good question to ask them how they view repairs, because it's more so like an HOA type situation, I would assume. But that's an interesting question.
Another one here. Ooh, Francis, can you mute? Okay, she creates a little bit of an echo. What are good ways for home improvement contractors to make connections with smaller landlords who need to renovate their properties but don't typically advertise that need? I think that could be a Abbe, Peter, Liz response.
I'm curious to hear. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I can say networking is one of the most important things. I mean, I'm not tooting Mass Landlord's horn, but we have a directory of small contractors. So any landlord goes on and based on their county, they can, plumber or carpenter, electrician, they just can find available people. We have these message boards, and there's a lot of it is, hey, I have this, appointing job, and I'm in Fitchburg, and who else has worked with anybody? Give me some ideas. I spend a lot of time when I'm in my neighborhood taking a little photograph of a contractor in my neighborhood. My congregation has a listserv, and we do a lot of networking. I think, it's good to get bid. I mean, what's most important is a small landlord to know how to engage a home improvement contractor to figure out, how to get a bid and how to compare bids and scope the job and supervise it and not get taken for all the money before all the work is done. As important as getting the right contractor is managing the contractor. So I would put that on the list of what is critical to know how to do as a small landlord. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and that's certainly what we've seen and heard in our work too with our Remodeling Future Steering Committee, for example, members on our committee. There's been a lot of change and shift in a way, to like the online home services, right? Like being able to connect with a contractor online, like through, Angie or Home Advisor or whatever, those types of services, just, trying to make that easier for folks, especially younger owners potentially who are digital natives and think that they should be able to do everything in their life on their phone immediately. But we consistently continue to hear from folks that, business is coming through word of mouth. I mean, so I think that connection, that networking, the local, knowing your neighborhood, knowing who works in your neighborhood or your city, is really important still.
Yeah, I would just echo those sentiments.
Has there been any consideration, this is from Todd Benjamin, is how can public-private partnerships help address these challenges?
Yeah, I think the public-private partnerships are critical. Public sometimes can be the funding source of affordable housing funds, and the private could be a private developer, could be private lending, but the public side can't always be the boots on the ground. We work at a higher level. And certainly the public-private partnerships could advocate for the real resources that would fill gaps in what we have available to us. So, I think there's probably a lot of opportunity for public-private partnerships. And I think Neighborhood Hub is helping us think about that.
Okay, I think we have about time for a final question. Peter, did you want to do the last question?
Sure. I think, didn't we already talk about the home improvement question about the contractors?
We did.
Mm-hmm.
We did.
I'm sorry, that was me. I forgot, and I wrote it on the chat. I'm just really interested in home improvement. But I think with that being said, I'm doing a little too much right now. But thank you all so much. We've had a lot of interest from a variety of different sources. I love it when we can all come together, be it from academia to boots on the ground in the cities, to the state level, to talking about good landlords and programs available for landlords, which is so important. So I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you to both of my moderators who were willing to be here for a few hours helping me out and talking about all this. Like I said, please, you can always find us through masshousing.com. And yeah, thank you all so much, and I hope you have a lovely Thursday. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.